Retirement's not a vacation. It's a whole new life. And here's what surprised me most about my first 90 days of retirement. And one of the things I think we all crave on YouTube is, what does it feel like? What does this experience feel like? And that's what I'm going to try to convey to you today. So I want to go over three areas. The first is emotionally. What did the first 90 days feel like? And then logistically, what were some of the minutiae I had to take care of? What were some of the logistical challenges? And then most importantly, relationship. What were the relationship challenges? So let's jump in. Let's talk about the emotional side of things. And I want to take you to the day that I told my boss that I wanted to retire. And the day started with a phone call from my wife saying, hey, you said you wanted to give your company at least 3 months notice. And if you want to retire by the date you said, it's coming up pretty quickly. So you need to have that conversation. And I had been putting it off for a couple of weeks. Now, I was a retirement advisor for over 20 years, so I was very aware of the emotions. I was very aware of what I was going through. But it's one thing to be a bystander, to be an advisor, to be a coach, to be a mentor. It's another thing to be on the field and going through these emotions. So what was I feeling? Boy, I was just super nervous, not about anything that anybody would say. Everybody at my work was very supportive, great organization. But I was worried about the fact it's a one-way street. Once I have this conversation, it's hard to go back. And so I kept putting it off. And that's not the way to do things, right? Professionally, I always tried to have difficult conversations sooner rather than later. But in this case, I really just wanted to be measuring twice, 3, 4, 5 times. And I had, like many of us, when you get to this stage, I had a bunch of excuses as to, well, I have to do this first and I have to do this other thing first. And there were all these pieces I wanted to put into place. And at some point, I began just kind of reshuffling the same chairs, really as an emotional crutch to give myself time to frankly come up with the courage and say, okay, I really am saying this chapter of my life is coming to an end. And it was kind of like in high school, I had a lot of fun and I was kind of sad to see that go. In college, I had a lot of fun. Before I went to go to business school, I enjoyed working and I'm sorry to see that chapter end. But there's this whole new life. So I think many of us have experienced things similar. But this is really big because after 20, 30, 40 years of working, of going into the office, emotionally, it's just ingrained a part of who we are, even if we have a very healthy life. So if you're feeling hesitant, if you feel like you're putting it off unnecessarily, you are not alone. You have good company. So that was the first emotion. Now, once I got over that, once I had the conversation and said, hey, I want to start talking about what does this look like? How do I make sure that when I leave, I'm leaving the organization as strong of a place as possible? How do we make this happen? So I had that conversation. And then frankly, I worked really, really hard over the next 100 days or so just to tie up all the loose ends and to leave the company in as good of a position as I could and to hand over things. Now that first day being retired, and when I left work, that first day, it was sad. It's hard. It's always hard to say goodbye. So that part was hard. But I got to tell you, I have like a 20-minute drive up the mountains. I lived in a ski town in Utah. So I had this drive up the mountains. And the higher I got in altitude and the closer I got to the summit of my drive up, just this feeling of pride, of joy, of excitement, a feeling, it's funny to say, but in many ways, I was just grateful that I was able to run the distance. That, there's a lot of pressure working in the United States. My company was great, but every day of my 22 years in that job, I was an at-will employee. And, there's just a certain amount of pressure that comes with that. And it was just nice to know I ran the distance. I was able to pay off my mortgage, fortunately. My wife and I were able to save money to put our kids through college. We were able to do many of the things that we always hoped to do. But, when you can lose your job at any time, you don't know. So there was just this feeling of relief and gratitude and frankly, a little bit of pride that I ran the distance. I made it to the goal line. And I don't think about retirement as a goal line, as a finish line. I think about retirement as a starting line. But that's what I was feeling that day when I was driving home. And then, of course, everybody's like, oh, congratulations, and how does it feel? And it's like a big birthday party, frankly, for like a month, when everybody you're meeting for the first time that knows you're now retired is asking how it's going. And it is like a vacation. It's one of the biggest celebrations, right? Probably, it was a bigger celebration. It lasted longer than the wedding party lasts. And, you get together with the wedding party ahead of time and, 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it is. But this is that kind of feeling of celebration of other people congratulating me. That lasted about a month. And then it was just this feeling of relief. And when I was working as a financial advisor, many of my clients would say, I did not know how much stress I was under until I gave up working. And I was the same way, even though I knew it was coming. I felt I could handle it all. But what I didn't realize is just how much pressure there was. The reality is we get more senior in our jobs, we're responsible to make things happen. We don't always have control over the factors that are going to control whether we can make that happen or not. So there's goals that we're working really hard to achieve. And, fortunately, most of the times I was able to achieve those goals, but sometimes you don't. And that's just life. But it was nice to have that weight lifted off of my shoulders. So emotionally, that's what it felt like. Logistically, probably the biggest logistical thing that caused me stress and still causes a little bit of stress is our healthcare insurance, right? We have a game plan. Right now I'm on COBRA, but eventually COBRA is going to run out. And my game plan is to go on the health insurance exchange, the Affordable Care Act exchanges. But the government is changing a lot. And so I hope that option is still available, but making sure my wife and I have quality healthcare insurance, because as we get older, the likelihood of needing healthcare insurance to date, knock on wood, we have not had to be major consumers of healthcare services. And I hope that continues, but I am logistically worried about that. I also moved during this period of time. I now live in the Pacific Northwest, so there's just the logistics of moving and getting the cars registered and new driver's licenses, things like that. Frankly, in hindsight, I think moving right away was probably a mistake. It worked out okay, but with the benefit of hindsight, I probably would have waited 6 months to a year before doing it. It was just so many changes at once. So that's logistical. And then the relationship shift. Now, fortunately, again, I got to cheat because I was a financial advisor. I saw through the lives of my clients how important it was that my wife and I would be on the same page. And so my wife retired 2 years before I did. So during that 2-year period before I retired, we had conversations. What does this look like when I retire? What do we want that to look like? So actually retiring brought us closer together. I do know for many couples it can be a stressful time. And hopefully by thinking ahead and planning ahead, you can avoid that stress. If this video has been helpful, the YouTube algorithm says this is the next video of mine specifically for you to watch next. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.